The morning air was crisp as James Parker made his usual drive down Riverside Road, coffee in hand, radio playing softly. It was 7:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the world was just waking up. He'd taken this route to work for 3 years now, and he knew every curve, every pothole, every landmark along the way. But this morning was different. As James rounded the bend near Miller's Creek, something caught his eye. A dog. A golden retriever, standing in the middle of the road, barking frantically. James slowed down, annoyed at first. Another stray causing trouble. But as he got closer, something about the dog's behavior stopped him from simply driving around it. The dog wasn't just barking randomly. It was looking directly at James's car, then turning toward the woods, then back at the car. Over and over. Bark, look, turn. Bark, look, turn. James pulled over to the shoulder and rolled down his window. "Hey, boy, get out of the road," he called out. The dog ran toward his car immediately, barking louder now, more urgently. Its fur was muddy, covered in burrs and leaves. When it reached James's door, it didn't jump up for attention or affection. Instead, it grabbed the sleeve of James's jacket through the open window and pulled. "Whoa, whoa, easy there," James said, startled. He opened the door, and the dog immediately released his sleeve and ran a few feet toward the tree line, then stopped and looked back, barking again. That's when James noticed something else. The dog was wearing a collar. A worn blue collar with a tag. This wasn't a stray. This was someone's pet, and it was trying to tell him something. James's grandfather had been a search and rescue worker, and he'd told James stories about dogs like this, dogs that knew. Dogs that could sense when something was wrong and would do anything to get help. "Okay, boy," James said, grabbing his phone and stepping out of the car. "Show me." The golden retriever took off immediately, running toward the woods but stopping every few yards to make sure James was following. James jogged behind, his dress shoes slipping on the damp leaves. The dog led him down a steep embankment, through thick brush, branches scratching at James's face and hands. "Where are you taking me?" James called out, his heart pounding now, adrenaline mixing with growing concern. The dog didn't answer, of course. It just kept running, kept looking back, kept barking that urgent, desperate bark. And then James heard it, a faint voice, weak, calling out, "Help, someone, please." James's blood ran cold. He pushed through the last of the brush and found himself at the bottom of a ravine. And there, lying against a fallen tree, was an elderly woman. Her leg was bent at an unnatural angle, her face pale, her lips blue from the cold. Next to her, a twisted bicycle lay in pieces. The dog ran to her immediately, licking her face, whimpering. "Oh my God," James breathed, scrambling down to her side. "Ma'am, can you hear me? I'm here to help." The woman's eyes fluttered open. She was in her 70s, maybe older, wearing a windbreaker and cycling gloves. Her breathing was shallow. "My leg," she whispered. "I fell last night. So cold." Last night. James looked at his watch. It was morning now. She'd been out here for hours. Maybe 10, 12 hours in the cold. Okay, stay with me," James said, his hands shaking as he pulled out his phone. No signal, of course. He was too deep in the ravine. The dog barked again, as if urging him to do something. James looked at the woman, then at the dog, then back up the steep embankment he'd just come down. He couldn't carry her up that slope, not with her leg like that. He could hurt her worse, but if he left to get help, she might not last. "What's your name?" James asked, trying to keep her conscious. "Margaret," she whispered. "Margaret Chen. Margaret, I'm James." "This is your dog?" "Cooper," she said, a tiny smile crossing her lips. "My Cooper, he stayed, all night." James felt his throat tighten. This dog had stayed with his owner through the freezing night, then somehow knew to flag down a car to get help. "Cooper's a hero," James said. "And so are you, Margaret. You're going to be okay." He took off his jacket and laid it over her, then his sweater too, leaving himself in just a thin dress shirt. He pulled out his phone again. Still no signal, he had to get higher ground. "Margaret, I need to climb up to call for help. Cooper's going to stay with you. I'll be as fast as I can." "Please," she whispered, "don't leave me." "I'm not leaving you, I promise. I'm getting help." James looked at Cooper, and in that moment he felt an understanding pass between them. "Watch her, boy. I'll be right back." James scrambled up the embankment, his hands grabbing at roots and rocks, his shoes slipping. His heart was hammering. What if she didn't make it? What if he couldn't get signal? What if no, he couldn't think like that? He reached the top, held up his phone. One bar was enough. His fingers were shaking so badly, he almost dropped the phone as he dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? "I found a woman at the bottom of a ravine off Riverside Road, near Miller's Creek. She's been here all night. Broken leg, hypodermic, elderly. We need an ambulance and rescue team now. Sir, can you give me your exact location? James rattled off the mile marker he'd seen on his drive, described the tree line, the embankment. The dispatcher assured him help was on the way, but it would take 15 minutes, maybe 20 given the terrain. Stay on the line with me, sir. I can't, James said. I need to get back down to her, just send help. Fast, he hung up and scrambled back down. When he reached Margaret, Cooper looked up at him with big, soulful eyes as if asking, "Did you do it? Is help coming?" "They're coming, buddy," James said, kneeling beside Margaret again. Her eyes were closed now. Margaret, stay with me." Her eyes opened slightly. "Cold," she murmured. James lay down next to her, wrapping his arms around her, sharing what little warmth he had left. Cooper pressed against her other side. The three of them, strangers an hour ago, now bound together in survival. "Tell me about Cooper," James said, trying to keep her talking. "How long have you had him?" 5 years, Margaret whispered. "After my husband died. Cooper saved me then too, just by being there." "He's saving you now," James said. "He's the smartest dog I've ever met." "He knew," Margaret said. "When I fell, he tried to help me up. But I couldn't, so he stayed, kept me warm, and when he heard your car, he knew what to do." James felt tears prick his eyes. This loyal dog, this incredible animal, had refused to leave his owner's side all through the freezing night, and then had the intelligence to flag down help at first light. Time seemed to stretch forever. James kept talking, kept Margaret conscious, kept rubbing her arms to generate warmth. Cooper never moved from her side, his head resting on her chest. And then finally James heard it. Voices, radios, the crash of branches. "Down here," James shouted. "We're down here." 3 paramedics appeared at the top of the embankment with rescue equipment. 2 firefighters followed. They made their way down with a stretcher and emergency supplies. "Good job, sir," one of the paramedics said as they immediately went to work on Margaret, checking vitals, stabilizing her leg, wrapping her in thermal blankets. "You saved her life." "It wasn't me," James said, looking at Cooper. "It was him." The paramedic looked at the dog and nodded, understanding. "We see it sometimes, dogs that just—" "No." They got Margaret onto the stretcher and carefully hauled her up the embankment. James carried Cooper, who had finally stopped barking, as if he knew his job was done. At the top, an ambulance was waiting, lights flashing. As they loaded Margaret into the ambulance, she reached out her hand. "James," she called weakly. He stepped forward and took her hand. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for listening, for following." "Thank Cooper," James said, his voice breaking. "He's the one who wouldn't give up on you." One of the paramedics looked at James. "We're taking her to County Memorial. You coming with?" James looked at his car, parked on the side of the road. He thought about his job, his meeting at 9 a.m., his boss who was probably already wondering where he was. And then he looked at Cooper and at Margaret being lifted into the ambulance. "Yeah," he said. "I'm coming with." At the hospital, James sat in the waiting room with Cooper at his feet. He'd called his boss, explained the situation. His boss had been surprisingly understanding. "Take the day," he'd said. "That woman is alive because of you." But James knew better. That woman was alive because of Cooper. After an hour, a doctor came out. "Are you here for Margaret Chen?" "Yes," James stood up quickly. "Is she okay?" "She's going to be fine. Broken femur, mild hypothermia, some cuts and bruises. But she's stable. She's asking for you and for her dog." James and Cooper followed the doctor to Margaret's room. She was lying in bed, hooked up to IVs, her leg in a cast and elevated. But she was awake, and she was smiling. When Cooper saw her, his tail started wagging so hard his whole body shook. He jumped up carefully onto the bed, and Margaret wrapped her arms around him, crying. "My good boy," she sobbed. "My good, brave boy." James stood in the doorway, not wanting to intrude on the reunion. But Margaret looked up at him. "James," she said, "come here." He stepped forward. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, "if you hadn't stopped, if you hadn't followed Cooper." "Anyone would have done the same," James said. "No," Margaret said firmly, despite her weakness. "They wouldn't have. I heard cars, before you, at least 3 or 4, they just drove past Cooper. You stopped, you listened, you cared." James felt his eyes getting wet again. I saw him and I knew something was wrong." "You saw him because you were paying attention," Margaret said. "You followed him because you trusted him. That takes a special kind of person." Over the next few weeks, James visited Margaret in the hospital, then at her home during her recovery. He learned she was a retired teacher, a widow, and an avid cyclist who'd hit a patch of gravel and gone over the handlebars into the ravine. He learned that Cooper was a rescue dog she'd adopted after her husband passed, and that he'd helped her through the deepest grief of her life. and Cooper had saved her life in return. The local news picked up the story. "Hero dog saves owner's life," read the headlines. Cooper became a minor celebrity, though he seemed unimpressed by the attention. He was just happy to be back home with Margaret. But for James, something had changed. He'd always been the guy who kept his head down, who rushed through life, who was too busy to notice. Now he drove slower on Riverside Road. He paid attention. He looked for the moments that mattered. And every Sunday, he visited Margaret and Cooper. They'd have coffee, and Margaret would tell stories about her late husband, and Cooper would rest his head on James's knee. "You know," Margaret said one Sunday afternoon, "people talk about fate and miracles. I don't know if I believe in all that, but I believe in you. And I believe in this dog." "I believe in paying attention," James said, scratching Cooper behind the ears. "I believe that sometimes if we just stop and listen, the world tells us exactly what it needs." Margaret smiled. "My husband used to say something like that. He'd say, 'The world is always speaking, Margaret. We just forget to listen.'" "Smart man," James said. "He would have liked you," Margaret said softly, "and he would have been so proud of Cooper." Cooper's tail thumped against the floor as if he understood every word. As James drove home that evening, the sun setting over the hills, he thought about how one moment, one decision to stop and pay attention had changed 3 lives. Margaret was alive, Cooper was a hero, and James had been reminded of what it meant to be human, to care, to listen, to act. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, to be guided by a brave golden retriever who refused to give up, refused to let the world pass by, and refused to let someone he loved face the darkness alone.